Good evening, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Alexis Sand. I'm a professor in the Department of Art and Design, and I am, the MC for the Communitas lecture series for 2018-2019. This is our fourth and final lecture of fall semester for the Communitas lecture series. We will have 4 more lectures in the spring, so keep an eye out for those dates, which begin in February. They are on our website, and you can look up the artists and the dates of their lectures there. The Communitas lecture series was begun in 2017 by then Department Head Laura Gelfand, who is currently on leave as a Fulbright scholar in England. And the idea of the series was really to invite to Utah State University nationally and internationally known artists and scholars whose focus was on issues of diversity, of community, of building a sense of togetherness through the arts, and exploring issues around diversity and community also through the arts. So we've had a fantastic run up to this point. This semester we've already heard from ceramicists and art educators, a photographer, and now tonight a museum curator. In the spring we'll be hearing from printmaker, a painter, interior designer, and a really exciting sculptor. So we're really covering a lot of grounds. And when I put people in those boxes, of course, I'm not really doing justice to their work because, as we've learned, many people are working across disciplines and in new media as well. We're really looking forward to the 2019-2020 series, which we're just putting together, which will also include people in arts administration, fundraising, and even a person from Kickstarter whose special area of responsibility is the arts. So I think it's going to be a really fantastic series next year as well. Just a few announcements before I introduce our speaker. Remember to turn off or silence your cell phone and other noisy devices. A big thank you to the sponsors of this series, the Marie Eccles Kane Foundation, Russell Family, the Tanner Foundation, and of course you, the students of the Kane College of the Arts, through differential tuition funding. So a big thank you to all of those, and to Kathy Puzzi, the department head for art and design, who has greased the wheels for Communitas this semester. Also don't forget to swipe when you leave if you are enrolled in Art 3710. So our speaker tonight is Cecilia Farjardo-Hill. She's a British and Venezuelan art historian and curator in modern art and contemporary art. Her specialty is Latin American art. She holds a PhD in art history from the University of Essex in the UK, and an MA in 20th century art history from the Courtauld Institute, which is really one of the leading art history schools in the world. She also has her advanced degree from there. So she's worked as a chief curator and director of a variety of important museums. I'm just going to mention the MOLA in Long Beach, California, which is a museum of Latin American art. She was also the chief curator for the Cisneros Foundation in Miami prior to that. Most recently, she was the co-curator of the show Radical Women, which she'll be talking about tonight, so I won't dwell on that too long. But she is currently a lecturer at the Roski School of Art and Design at USC, and she's also got a really fabulous website called Abstraction in Action. First of all, it rhymes, so it's easy to remember. But second of all, it's a fantastic example of digital humanities work, where this is a platform for research and advocacy for Latin American abstract art from the 1990s forward into the 21st century. And she is currently working on a project, co-curating a show that will open in 2020 at the Phoenix Art Museum. And I know she has a lot of other projects, but I thought this one had a cool title, so I wanted to mention it. It's called Chicane Experimentale, so I think you can kind of imagine what that might deal with. And she also has 2 books at press with, I think it's University of Chicago Press. So really impressive publication and curation record, and we are just so fortunate to have her here tonight to talk to you about the process of curating this extremely challenging and important exhibition. Please give her a hand. Thank you.
Good night, or good night. It feels night because it's so dark here. Good evening. Thank you very much for the invitation, Alexa. Thank you very much from the Department of Art and Design at the Utah State University, and thank you very much to the students for being here of the college. So today I'm going to talk about Radical Women, Latin America, now 1960-85. Is an exhibition that is still open in Sao Paulo at the Pinacoteca, which is the main museum there. And I don't know if you follow the news, but Brazil has just voted in someone who is basically vouching for dictatorship. And it's interesting because everything that the exhibition stands for, it stands for human rights. There is a big chapter in the exhibition that talks about oppression and dictatorship, because the period that the exhibition covers, which is 1960 to 85, is a period in time in Latin America where there were many dictatorships taking place. And because the exhibition includes Latinas and Chicana artists in the US, we tend to maintain a separation whenever we talk about, let's say, Latinos, or we talk about Native Americans or African American. We tend to ghettoize as opposed to create kind of broader conversations across cultures and understanding kind of a more expansively certain ideas about contemporary art and nation and politics and everything. So for us, it was very important to include Latina and Chicana artists. And whenever I gave tours, people will say, yeah, but in the US, there wasn't a dictatorship, so what are you talking about? But the reality is that in the 60s and 70s, human rights for African American, Latinas, and Chicanas, and it wasn't really great. In effect, there was actually enforced sterilization of women of color in this country when they wanted to control the population. So for all account, the type of rights that many of these people had was not actually the same as other people, other members of the country, white people, as you would say. So this exhibition took 8 years to be produced, and it was incredibly hard at the beginning to do it. I co-curated this project with an Argentinian academic and curator called Andrea Junta. And what happened was that every time I proposed this exhibition to happen, I was told that it was a terrible idea, that the women that we already knew in the history of Latin America now were enough, and that sadly there weren't enough really interesting experimental women, etc., etc. Even members of the arts community that I have a lot of respect, that I have written about conceptual art, basically there was a really kind of bad situation about it, and I was actually working in an institution that felt so strongly about this exhibition, and eventually I was actually asked to leave because I didn't want to pursue the project. Eventually, because in last year, there was a big event in California called Pacific Standard Time, LALA, that was actually spearheaded by the Getty Foundation. It was about bringing together Latin American exhibition. It's the biggest event of its kind that has ever happened. There were more than 80 exhibitions sponsored by the Getty. And the Hammer Museum was actually looking for a project, and they eventually ended up by taking, and we ended up developing the project with them. And it makes a lot of sense because the Hammer Museum, even though it doesn't really have a lot of interest in Latin American art, it does have a chief curator who is a feminist, the director is a feminist. So it was the first time in the years that we've been working in the project that we didn't have to answer why women, that's a bad idea, et cetera, et cetera. So at least we were the party from a point of view that it was an interesting project. Here you have the names of the artists that participated in the project. This list includes artists that in different moments in time, because the exhibition traveled between LA, New York, the Brooklyn Museum, and Brazil, somehow the checklist changed a little bit, because in some cases, for example, museums in the US tend not to lend to institutions in South America, even when you're talking about the Pinacoteca in Sao Paulo, which is one of the greatest museums in the world. So kind of inequality in terms of the way that culture circulates begins very much there, so we had to kind of improvise and change some artists and include other people. So even though the title of the exhibition is called Radical Women, I mean, that is, the idea is radicality, but it's also about the idea of the political body. For us, this exhibition was very much about the creation of a new iconography. Women throughout history have been, and you may have seen the statistics of the Guerrilla Girls, normally women have been represented, usually through ideals of beauty, but then they have had very little opportunity to participate themselves. And when you look at the histories of conceptual art, the histories of contemporary art in Latin America, there's basically very, very few women participated into that history. So both Andrea Giunta and myself are art historians, so we consider this project a project of recuperation of an historical nature, where we actually can demonstrate through the sheer size of this project that there were really, really important women, and they contributed in very important ways about the art world. If you can see the breakdown of the media there, photography and video are the two biggest mediums, and that has a particular reason. When you look at art history, the main medias, which was sculpture and painting, women were pretty much excluded and not very much. So the history is very a history of patriarchalism, where for women had to struggle very much to be able to participate, being taken into account. And the reality, when you actually look at the way that art history judges, and still the art world judges women, it judges them through a kind of a stronger scale. It's normally, if women are experimental, they call them kitsch, they say that they're not original, they arrive later, and also there is a whole mythology around the fact that they can be mothers, and then, so if they're mothers, they can be good artists, and so forth, when in effect, many women have used their maternity as an incredible source of ideas and power in their work. So I think in this exhibition, we wanted to dispel some of these myths. Another way is that art history always is constructed around the idea that you have to have a really kind of long, straight, successful career. If you, because of the color of your skin and because of your social conditions, because the system is very classist, you have not been allowed to participate in the art system. There are no books published about you. Your work may have been even destroyed. So how can you actually prove that you were a wonderful artist if nobody wants to actually pay attention? So I guess one of the first questions we need to ask is, where are the women? What is the contribution? Wanted to actually look at the work. And this is what we did. In many countries that we went, people will say, but there are none, we don't know anybody. So we went into archives, and a lot of artists actually helped us on this. They talk about friends, and we went to people's archives, and somehow, this amounted to this kind of information. We actually have a digital archive that has about 500 or 600 artists in it, because the field is enormous. So this only covers one small aspect of the field, but a really powerful one. So I think it is important to understand that a great, majestic art career is not something guaranteed. Still today, women artists represent between 10 and 30% only of the art system. So still today, imagine what it was in the 60s and 70s for women to participate. And in some cases, they really did. The problem is when they did, then when people wrote the history, it's simply they erased their memory. So we have to take into account this in the same way it's happened with people of color, African-American people, when we consider different genres like pop art or any other forms, we consider that the work, because it's vernacular, is not really pop, and so forth. So there is a lot of pitfalls in the way that this history is constructed. The exhibition, we didn't want to include a huge amount of documentation in the show. We wanted an exhibition that was very powerful from an artistic point of view. So we included this large chronology of events that was related to political events in all the different countries that were in the exhibition, and also rights of women. And it was actually possible when you were visiting the show to come outside and try to understand why a certain artist was doing something or responding in a particular way depending on the nationality of the artist. This is an image, this is video, a filmmaker that did a video recently called 2015 called No Más Bebés, which was about enforced sterilization. And in fact, there was an artist, a Chicana artist in the exhibition that did actually talk about this. So when we look, these are works that were not in the exhibition, but when we actually look at art history, for example, Deborah Arango, who was a woman that was censored during her lifetime, every time he tried to exhibit between the 40s and the 60s because she was political and promoted an idea of the body that was actually sort of grotesque from the perspective, and also she included bodies that were marginalized. She was censored again and again. For example, these images like a Madonna of the Silence, where you have a woman in jail giving birth in jail, and if you think, her face is incredibly harsh, but at the same time, the body is like a monumental sculpture, and her presence is very powerful. Or the mystic woman on the right-hand side, who was her best friend who became a nun, and again, she's very transgressive here. In front of the nun, or the to-be nun, she paints these red flowers representing sensuality. The church is behind her, not in front of her. And on her arm, she has actually a bracelet. Or for example, Emilia Preto in the 1920s to 40s developed in Costa Rica all this incredible iconography, anti-fascist iconography through kind of wood carvings. Or for example, Tecla Tofano, who was in the exhibition, but this is an incredible piece that did not actually arrive at the exhibition, even though it is reproduced in the catalog, because she was originally Italian, immigrated to Venezuela, but is actually in the National Gallery in Venezuela. And because Venezuela has a negative relationship political with the US, it was incredibly difficult. We tried for 2 years to get the piece, and in the end it wasn't there. And it was 3 life-size ceramic pieces with a female, a man, and the third being was called ellos, they, which is a term that we use today for transgender or non-conforming people. So this was pretty advanced in 1977. Then she wrote a very interesting text that was a symbolic idea about a human being that in the future could actually include some femininity and some masculinity to understand what it means to be the other person, and to have a little bit of tenderness, to be strong, and not to conform to the gender roles in which we are constantly bombarded. This kind of very patriarchal role of the father figure, of the man, and a woman as a submissive woman. So this for me was incredibly painful that she wasn't there, but this is the piece. So you can see on both breasts, one is a female breast, one is a male breast, but the babies are suckling from both sides. So when we did the exhibition, you know that the model for museums and exhibition that has been established now for a very long time, since the prominence of modernism is the idea of the white cube. We've settled to the fact that we have a model that is the best model for showing contemporary art or modern art or antique art, which means that you create a very neutral background so that you actually show a piece that you can actually enjoy and appreciate, but then you kind of create a whole neutrality around it. It makes it is an experience that really is a kind of a solitary, is a piece that stands on its own. So we actually looked both for the publication and also for the museography and models of exhibition that had actually happened in Latin America throughout the 60s and 70s that were of more experimental nature. Like this one, you can see it has objects in different places, people talking in the middle, there is no really order. For example, this kind of exhibition of photography where you have this kind of accumulation of photography. So here there is not so much the celebration of the individual artist, but a sense of this kind of communal kind of photography nature of the space. Or for example, this structure on the left-hand side where you have the sculptures that are very low level, so you can actually really perceive them with your body in a different way than when they stand in a plinth in a normal size. And Lina Bobardi was an incredible architect, that it was an Italian architect that moved to Brazil, and she designed a museum that is a wonderful museum and today has been completely recovered, called MASP, Museo de Arte de Sao Paulo. And she actually invented her own museum displays. And these are the collection of the museum is one of the best universal art collections in Latin America. And you can see that the pieces stand on a cube of cement, on a piece of glass that allows you to see the piece both from the outside and on the back. And also it allows you to travel over time as if you were traveling around, like a forest of art. And then you can actually, with your gaze, kind of have a more active gaze, looking across time, looking across works, and create different, kind of a more active type of participation as a spectator. Or for example, here, another model that she created, that it was a floating grid. So again, the works, you can see them and appreciate them. Also, you can actually walk in the space in kind of parallel ways. For example, here you're standing and again you see the work. So there is the idea of the white wall as the way to enjoy the art is not so much. In the end, we could not really settle through this, but we really much kept into account this idea. This was the introductory piece when you enter the exhibition.
Apenas 7 años. ¿Qué 7 años? No llegaba a 5 siquiera. De pronto unas voces en la calle me gritaron, ¡negra! 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 ¿Soy acaso negra? Me dije. Sí, ¿qué cosa es ser negra? ¡Negra! Yo no sabía la triste verdad que aquello escondía. ¡Negra! Y me sentí.
So we won't have time to watch a lot of the video, but basically this is Victoria Santa Cruz, a woman that really we incorporate into the exhibition. We weren't very bothered with the idea that it has to be a paint, it has to be a graphic something. She was mainly coming from the world of dance. She believed very much in the idea of Afro-Peruvian culture. And this is a video where she tells her story about being black. When she discovers at the age of 7 that she was black is because people in the street started calling her black, black. And she understood that was a negative term. She becomes very uncomfortable with her body. She wants to straighten her hair, whiten her face. She feels that her lips are too full until one day, every time that she's attacked and she's been accused of being black, she feels that she's kind of walking back and she's about to fall. And eventually she decides she's going to stand and say, I am black and so what? Soy negra y qué? And then there is a whole movement of the body, this kind of gesture of self-affirmation. And it was, for us, incredibly important, this idea of having Victoria Santa Cruz introducing, because maybe it's about you being queer, maybe it's about you simply being a woman, but is the self-portraiture, which was the first theme of the exhibition, was about declaring where you stand in society, and often also declaring the fact that society is actually putting you in a position where you are oppressed, but at the same time creating a sense of a form of resistance through the way you actually produce your work. So this is one. For example, Teresa Burga, we had a kind of a room where she creates a whole scientific display of her. She did a blood test, she did tomographies, and she did a whole sort of sets of things. She even had heartbeat sounding, and you would enter this room. It was completely scientific. So when science tries to pin down a human being to the point of dissecting every single part of their body, in the end you get nothing. The subjectivity is completely to apprehended. And in reality, because we created a room, you would literally enter in a body. The heartbeat was such a powerful thing. So this work was done also in the middle of the dictatorship in Peru. So again, science, oppression, they're not necessarily forms in which you can actually dominate a human being. For example, this we included as a self-portrait. This is Narcisa Hirsch, a very important filmmaker still alive in Argentina, that spends the whole video of 16 minutes just describing who she is through this image, fixed image of the studio. So this idea that you can actually be represented through the things that are important to you, some elements of your work. This is Judy Baca, Las Tres Marias. This is a really kind of important piece from 1976. Judy Baca is very famous for being a muralist, but basically, Las Tres Marias, the Three Marys, this is a very kind of large piece. You have to, in order to really appreciate it, you have to stand in front of it. In the middle of it, there is a mirror. So in order to see it, you have to be the third Mary, no matter if you're a man or whoever you are socially. And on the right-hand side, this drawing is based on a photograph of herself as a Pachuca, was a kind of a fashion and a way of existing of Chicanos that created a whole fashion for themselves, that it was perceived as gangster, bad taste. And then on the left-hand side, you have a chola, was a real woman that came in and out of jail, a marginalized person. So basically, in this piece, she includes in the social fabric of something that people don't even want to see or appreciate. And also the whole object is amazing. It's all upholstered with red velvet as an homage to low-riders cars, which is an incredible form of material resistance of the Chicanos. This is how the exhibition looked when you entered the space. You had the Victoria Santa Cruz images you get in. It was a very large installation. The important thing about it, that the exhibition was constructed as a landscape. And the landscape, the idea was that you saw a whole landscape of works. You were able to appreciate them, but also you were constantly seeing them in the context of other works. Liliana Porter, who came to the opening, she said that for her the exhibition was like a great chorus, so you had many voices, but at the same time it was a forum. So there was a conversation. And here you have another image. There you have standing the work of Judy Bach, and then you have some pieces by Patsy Valdez, Lenora de Barros. So the whole time there were things happening in the space. It still looks a little bit like a white cube, but it was much more denser when normally the museum will do the exhibitions. We had another theme which was called Body Landscape, that possibly was the most poetic of all, which was actually the main piece was this piece by Vera Chavez Barcelos. She was originally a printmaker, but what she did is she did print makes of different parts of her body. You can see here she has a nipple, pieces of lips, she has skin, pubic hair, and then she invited friends, and also they actually made kind of imprints of their bodies, and then she enlarged them through photographic process and created what she called an epidermic scape. For her, every single body contains an infinite variability and richness in its own specificity in skin, but they're all skins. So this is a landscape, it's a collective landscape that could go on forever. Every single body could be included forever into this piece. This is Yen and Nan. It's actually a video. You can hardly see them moving, transfiguration of elements. There is a series of different works related to the earth, water, and they learned this technique called tratak, which while the earth, the mud that was actually covering their bodies, that they actually smeared on each other's body, would dry while they would never actually blink. This is Sylvia Gruner, another artist from Body Landscape. This is a beautiful, simple gesture of a body climbing up the hill. You can see a kind of a Sisyphean kind of gesture, but it's also a celebration of the body in conjunction with the earth. For us, it was beautiful because nowadays, there has been so many kind of stereotypical ideas about, new age ideas of the earth and the Pachamama and the body related to the Mother Nature. But the reality, these ideas, in the original inception, they're actually really interesting, wonderful ideas. And if we were more respectful towards the earth, thinking more of ourselves in relation to it in conceptual, symbolic, or ways, I guess the earth wouldn't be in the situation that it is today. Nowadays when we look at performances and we look at different movies, some of these things are just like very simple, very powerful gestures. Okay. This is another landscape. This is one of the few. We didn't have a lot of painting, but again, this is Delfina Bernal, an artist from Colombia, creating a landscape, seascape, all made with human organs. You have a sperm inseminating an ovule, you have a heart, you have cells growing in the landscape. This is Cecilia Vicuña. It's funny because, you have the Robert Smithson's spiral jetty here. And Lucy Lippard, who is a very important art historian and curator that has been a true pioneer of conceptual art and feminism and interculturalism. She actually wrote about this piece. It's a poetic piece where the artist has a very close relationship with kind of symbolic ideas of indigenous traditions of landscape. She's from Chile, and she had this kind of particular call in relation to the sea and the location called Concon, and she created this kind of earth piece, and this piece actually was prior to Robert Smithson, and Lucy Lippard made a point that a gesture as simple and beautiful as this was completely ignored in art history in favor for this much more grand visible gesture of Smithson. I don't think that one precludes the other. The problem is when you have all these kind of works by male artists that are the only reason that you have to see at art, and that's the reason why you would never look at a woman's art. Maria Velia Marmolejo, who did this kind of ritual of forgiveness because of the contamination, the pollution of the River Cauca, and then she exchanged her own menstrual fluids with the fluids of the earth. Or for example, Ciudad Mujer, Paula Weiss, who was a pioneer of video art in Mexico and then created this kind of collusion of this body that wasn't an ideal, beautiful body with the city of Mexico. This gives you a sense of how the type of works, I mean, the works, there were like 70 works in the show, so I'm only going to show you some. And this is the way the space looked. So you had all these screens talking to each other. You had this kind of epidermiscapes of Vera Chavez Barcelo. It was a really kind of quite wonderful experience to be inside this space. And then you could see the self-portrait going on the other way. Then we had a section called Performing the Body that was about exercises that cross between theater, dance, happenings, performance. This is Silvia Palacios Whitman, a Chilean artist that was very active in New York, doing this kind of very interesting performances, very simple gesture with a lot of elements in space. So Leisha Clark, The I and the You, she's a really, really important artist. And this piece particular is, she created these suits that had these kind of tubes that would connect with each other, had little pockets, and also had little texture like algae, sponges. And basically, you will cover your face. As Western people, we are dominated, our senses are dominated by our eyes. Our eyes judge the world and limit the way that we can actually think beyond our vision. So by closing the eyes, you actually touch another person's body. You're allowed to enter the other person through the pockets. And the idea is that as you do this exercise and you're not seeing yourself or the other person, you actually somehow blur your identity, your own gender. You can become the other gender and so forth. That's why it's called the I and the You. It's a very powerful, I've had the chance to actually try it, and it really is powerful. Or Marta Rauge, that created these kind of geometric things. There is a Velcro, and then you kind of stick your body onto the wall, and then your position of the body, you kind of lose control. It creates kind of an organic geometry. This is a piece that was done during the time of the dictatorship. And again, if you see how the bodies move in a very mechanic way, they're dressed in a geometric way, they have a grid. And the reality is that even though it is incredibly controlled by this Laban system, by this sound, the body, the great metaphor here is that the body, no matter how much you constrain it within a structure that is rigid, within a movement that is rigid, because our bodies are organic, are alive, you can never create the rigidity, you can never contain it in such a way. Sorry, I have to go fast because we don't have a lot of time. This is how the gallery looked. We had different columns that we covered with screens so that you will be able to actually see the works. Then we had a strong section in the exhibition called Mapping the Body, which is really about reconceptualizing the body and rethinking it. This is Liliana Maresca, a woman that will think her body in terms of sense of prostheses through collected pieces that she will collect in the urban landscape of Buenos Aires. Or for example, Ana Maria Maiolino, a Brazilian artist originally from Italy that created a whole series of mental maps that were based on Lacanian maps and ideas. And so it's interesting here because, often women, they think they're super sentimental, they can be mentally this and that and so forth. And in this very kind of conceptual way, she talks about this kind of dynamic of the mother figure, the father figure, and this kind of mental map that is kind of something that is complex, has all these gaps and relationships in between them. Then you had a piece like Marta Palau. The one on the right we didn't have because it was too large. This is, for me, a very rebellious sculpture. If you think of sculpture, this is a piece made with a kind of an organic material. It hangs in space in a very strange way. It's very large, and it's really kind of a gigantic vagina. So it really makes the space into this completely kind of feminine entity. And it's not a conventional thing by any way. It's not precious and has a sense of labor because it's actually a kind of a textile. And the piece on the right-hand side, the cascade, is like a huge cascade of sperm. This is Sophie Rivera. This was one of the pieces in the show that was most disturbing whenever I gave a tour. This is a New Yorican artist from New York that is an incredible photographer, and she made these still lifes, rouge and noir, homages to menstrual blood. You will have like bloody tampexes from afar that look like these beautiful ovals, and then the other one you have excrement. And I think women in this sense have been incredibly brave about talking about anything. There is no taboo. Bodily fluids, which are natural things in humans, are actually there, they exist, and we can actually talk about it. I mean, we have people like Bataille during the Surrealist time talking about these ideas of the inform as a really important aspect of how we can maybe think of ourselves. And then you have, for example, Ana Mendieta. You may know her work, Glass and Body Imprints, where she deforms her body through kind of pressing it against glass. And again, you know, these, for me, are kind of forms of resistance also about ideas of beauty. You know, women have been submitted so much to the absolute demand of beauty and idealism that, you know, it hardly conforms anybody that exists. So she not only was a very beautiful woman, but she denies a possibility and fragments her body. Also talking about this fragmentation of women, of society, in her own self. And María Vera Marmolejo, another woman who does a performance from 1981 called 11 de Marzo, 11 of March. Again, it was also an homage to women. It was an exorcism to the ideas of menstruation. And also she refers back to a myth, an indigenous myth from Chocó, from a region in Colombia, which says that women existed first, and then they created a man through menstrual blood and using earth. Even though these things are not real, but if you've been brought up in a very, very Christian society where women are completely kind of put to the side to serve men and to be kind of humiliated in these kind of very submissive roles, to find in these kind of originary mythologies, these kind of symbolic ideas of liberation of the body and actually celebrating something that is natural is actually quite wonderful. This is one of the exhibition views of the Mapping the Body section as you were coming in. We had a section called Resistance and Fear, Ana Maria Maiolino again, you know, she created with these scissors all these images where she will be about to cut her tongue or her nose and her eyes, again talking about repression during the time of the dictatorship. This was a really harsh theme in the exhibition because it really talked about the destructive nature of violence during the civil wars, for example, in Guatemala and Colombia, and the dictatorships, and also, for example, here, presunto is a slang word, really is a word for ham in Portuguese, but it's a slang word for corpse. You know, how many bodies have been abandoned during these wars and situations on the street in just bags? And it was a very monumental piece to Sonia Gutierrez. You know, always say that, you know, pop art, possibly in the States, it was one of the few places where pop art was not a political movement. There is a whole section of pop art, you know, done by African-American artists, for example, that is completely political. And in this case, is about torture of, especially during the Civil War in Colombia in the 1970s, they were especially violent towards students and young people who were one of the forefronts of the political movements against repression. And these are women that will just hoisted up and then tortured and then hoisted down.
Salve María, llena eres de gracia, el Señor es contigo, bendita tú eres entre todas las mujeres, y bendito es el fruto de tu vientre Jesús. Dios te salve María, llena eres de gracia, el Señor es contigo, bendita eres entre todas las mujeres, el fruto de tu vientre Jesús. Dios te salve María, llena eres de gracia, el Señor es contigo, bendita eres entre todas las mujeres.
So that piece is very powerful. Gloria Camiroaga is an artist from Chile who did a lot of work about violence, especially towards women during the time of the dictatorship. And these are her own daughters. And she will have them eating these popsicles, and when they're eating them, they're saying the Hail Mary, and then there is little soldiers inside. It's really to show how pervasive violence was, even to the most innocent act, like eating a popsicle, and this kind of sexualization also of the body, the violence, the type of... There was a lot of rape during the dictatorship, and also, you know, women that were pregnant that will be just cut open without any anesthesia, and a lot of cruelty, and also the fact that the church was very much compliant with the kind of the way that it worked. Margarita Paxa's Silence, this possibly was the kind of ground zero of the exhibition, is just a simple acrylic box talking about silence, oppression, in the sense that, you know, when you have a society where you're not allowed to speak, there is nothing to be said. Ana Mendieta, I think the most haunting images that I know in history come from these images that she created a performance in Iowa where she was studying. There was a horrific rape of a student, and then she invited friends to her house, student colleagues, and then when they arrived, they found her in this situation. She had actually created a whole enactment in her studio where she pretended that there had been a rape in her, really to kind of show the horrific situation. You know, sometimes we don't want to see the reality for what it is, and it's so mediated through the news and the way that things come down to us. And I think art has this incredible power to talk just through images about, you know, some of the real horrors or wonderful things about the world and humans. This was another view. So here we are looking from resistance and fear all the way to the end, to the section of the erotic, which was a completely, you know, the end of the exhibition was a celebration of life. You know, this is another section where you had Sonia Gutierrez with her tortured people, you know, in Dalo with Gloria Camiroaga's popsicle piece. We had a section in the exhibition called Power of Words. You know, conceptual art is very grounded in ideas of uses of language. And for example, this is Leticia Parente from Brazil, and it was about, you know, what in Mark registered Mark, what does it mean to be Brazilian during the time of the dictatorship? Who are you as a human being? And this is really what she questioned when she does something like this. Oleonora de Barros is thinking about in which moment the body and the mind can actually create poetry. And she actually creates this image in herself where her tongue becomes capable of fertilizing the keys of the machine. And she describes it as a kind of almost like an erotic act where her own tongue and herself becomes almost an androgynous being capable of having this kind of masculine force and the feminine force. Or Regina Silveira, you know, women have always been associated with ideas of domesticity, and then you have the word art made of a cookie. We actually distributed this for the opening and also in Brazil. And then, you know, you make your art and then you eat it. It's a very kind of simple gesture, and it's a wonderful gesture, and also refers back to ideas of anthropophagia. There was a very important movement in the 1920s in Brazil about kind of rethinking of Brazilian culture in relation to Western colonization. Marta Maria Perez from Cuba is a series when she was pregnant. It was all about all the prejudices, you know, in Afro-Cuban and all the sort of things that you shouldn't do when you're pregnant because your child is going to be born like this, is going to die, and she will defy again and again these ideas. Here you have a feminist section, Ana Victoria Jimenez, a very important photographer who has never really been acknowledged in the art system. She created a whole section, 10 different house chores that she photographs, you know, and also you can see this hand is an older hand, the toilet is not a really kind of a rich toilet. Again, making visible these things that actually are daily chores. Anyway, this is a really funny video by Maria Luisa Albenberg, who became a very important filmmaker. She was a feminist, and there was a big fair, a woman's world in Argentina, with all these kind of things, how to be a good wife, how to look beautiful, how to diet, and so forth. And at the entrance of the fair, they will distribute these kind of papers, pro-feminist papers, and then she makes this kind of collage of really absurd superimposition of how ridiculous it was, this kind of all this kind of catering for women to be something else.
Echó café en la taza. Echó la leche en la taza de café.
I want to show you the...
Pero, sin hablarme, sin mirarme.
Well, we don't really have time to see this very much, but Patricia Restrepo was a member of Cine Mujer, was a feminist film group. And what happens is that she wanted to create, she had a real tragedy in her life. Her partner committed suicide in front of her, and he was a very important right-hand figure in the Kali art scene. And she went through a kind of a big process, and she wanted to make a film that talked about the loneliness that women sometimes feel in relationship and in relationship to what had happened. And she takes this poem by this poet called Prevet. It was called In the Morning, where there is a woman that stands in front of her man in the table, and he's completely indifferent. He's drinking coffee. Whenever the camera looks at him, the time kind of speeds up, and he smokes a cigarette. He's so happy. He spends the whole time without even looking at her, even when he leaves the table. She actually had to leave the feminist group during doing that, because for the feminists, they considered that made women weak, and she was like, but this is the thing that women really feel. And it's an incredible celebration of understanding and creating an awareness of what women often feel when they are relegated into this relationship and when they're kind of staying at home. Maris Bustamante, this is actually a mask that you will put on, and it was like a work tool to get rid of Freud's machismo. She created a whole amount of pieces, feminist works, where she will have a penis in the head, and it was all about teasing, because Freud used to say that one of the issues with women's neurosis is that women will forever, ever and ever have an envy of the penis that men have, therefore being always dissatisfied, etc., etc. She will really kind of tease out this idea.
Traen algo que se llama polvo de gallina negra.
Sí.
¿Qué es esto?
Polvo de gallina negra es el nombre, da lugar la pregunta porque de hecho ha sido un magno proyecto que se gestó.
Es un proyecto artístico sobre la maternidad.
Anyway, this is a collective group in Mexico called Polvo de Gallina Negra that actually was experimenting with different ways of exhibiting their work, and they were invited by the most popular TV program at the time, and they invited him to be a mother for the day. And they had just got their young babies, so they bring a prosthetic belly and they kind of crown him as a mother. So this kind of queerization through this kind of ridiculing of the body and putting him in a position in front of the TV as being a mom, and he plays along. And it's a very, very funny video. Humor is often a very subversive thing. Or for example, there was this piece, Sometime I'm scared by my own feelings and my own fantasies, and it's a little object with curtains, and then you have a vagina or a penis, and at the end you have a person with all the thoughts. And the idea that we sometimes fantasize about the body and who we are, and that we don't really want to acknowledge it, we hide it. This is how the feminist section looked. We had Lea Lublin at the end with a great manifesto about all the things that women have been accused of. And this is the section of Ana Victoria Jimenez with all the different photographs of the house chores. Then we have social places, which is a section in the exhibition which talks about how women see themselves with empathy within kind of social structure. This is Lourdes Grubert, who, as a Mexican photographer, did a whole series for years of luchadores, and also did luchadoras. And in this case, it's the double fight. Women who, when they are behind after the ring, they have to go and feed their babies. It's kind of human side. For example, Beatriz Gonzalez from Colombia, pop artist from there, Canción de Cuna, that will take this very cheap kind of furniture and then will paint religious iconography, kind of a little bit badly made, to tease out a little bit this kind of hyper-Christian conservative society of Colombia. Paz Errázuriz, a photographer from Chile that became very close friends with a community of transgender prostitutes in Chile. At the time was actually during the dictatorship, it was forbidden, so it was a big risk for these women to exist. They created this incredible group of photographs showing the kind of intimate human side of all these women. Or Claudia Andujar, a Swiss woman that emigrated, a Jewish woman emigrated to Brazil, and she was looking for a social form that for her fulfilled the idea of a true society, and she found it among the Yanomami Indians, and she helped to create a vaccination process, and because they don't reveal the name, she had to put numbers. Whenever in history you put a number, mark a body with a number, it's because that body is worth nothing. It's either going to jail or is marked for destruction, like in the Jewish camp or in Cambodia or whatever. And in this case, it's completely the opposite. It's a body that is marked to actually being saved, being helped. And for her, this kind of tension between all her family that she's lost in the Holocaust and these indigenous people that were her new family with these numbers is very powerful. This is Patsy Valdez. She's a member of a very, very important conceptual collective called ASCO. And because she's still beautiful, but she was a super beautiful woman then. And she's in many of the photographs. And she's always been seen a little bit like the inspiration of the group, but not the kind of conceptual inceptor. And really, all this kind of masquerading and all this idea of trappings and creating this kind of theatrical situation really came from her. And she used to do these things about, thinking that, the Chicana women are considered to be like these peasants and not really beautiful. And she will create all this kind of sense of glamour and sense of the queer. And it's really an amazing work that she used to do. I'm actually running out of time. This is how the social places section looked. It was very densely packed, and it had sort of works in relation to each other. And then this is another section again, have pieces with celebrated bodies and normally are not considered to be kind of valuable to be represented. Then we had the erotic section, which was the last section of the exhibition, the love-making box that had a little handle. We couldn't use it, where the heart flutters inside the box and the two faces seem to touch, but they never touch. It's about really the tribulations of love. Or Marcia Shish, or X, as they called it, used to make these very, very controversial performances, which, sometimes the police will close down, she will inflate penises and dolls and create those and then she was incredibly critical of the hypocrisy of the church, and she was considered to be completely heretic. Or Zilia Sanchez, that created this abstract piece called Erotic Topologies that were really kind of emulating parts of the body, especially breasts. And then there are very powerful, very sculptoric pieces like this, or then Marta Minujín, who is a very important Argentinian artist. And this mattress piece, she will create this kind of large installation where she will invite people to get naked and dance and, do poetry, this kind of very kind of freedom of the body, and the mattress standing also for the body, something sensual. Or Karen Lamasson, that for a long time created a whole series of works where she would actually go into people's bathrooms and shut herself and draw herself in intimate situation, either doing peas or bathing herself, and there was a whole thing about exploring her own sexuality. Isabel Castro, X-rated bondage, she knew that there was a lot of sexual trafficking, and she wasn't allowed to go into the kind of sex shops, but she would buy a magazine and then photograph images of, for example, bondage, and create these kind of shadows with bars and things to kind of create a sense of how many people were actually in this situation without them really wanting. And the reality is, after she made this work, people understood that she was actually promoting these things, that she was censored, that she was taken out of commissions for the Olympics. It was something that it cost her very dearly to do. I thought this had a sound. I'm actually running out. But basically, refers back to the idea of the original sin. It's done very much tongue-in-cheek, kind of playing around with the kind of images of the kind of whole Christian iconography that talks about, how women are the real reason why, we've fallen off grace in the world. Or Kathy Horner, working with Lenora Carrington, and created these kind of beautiful images that talk about the relationship between Eros and Thanatos. We had Felisa Burstein. This is a kind of a bed that, when you come, has a sensor, and it has this kind of very large cloth on top, and then it kind of vibrates, and it really makes you feel that you are somehow seeing a couple making love. And at the time when she actually presented these works in the 1970s, it was a huge scandal, even though there is really nothing, and it's really your imagination, and also the red cloth talks about something kind of that is supposed to be kind of cheap. And this is another image of how the section of the erotic it looked. I just wanted to kind of briefly show you a few images because I'm finished now of how the exhibition looked. For example, at the Brooklyn, we had a super graphic also in LA. In this case, they chose at the Brooklyn a photograph of Yolanda Andrade, which was actually a gay march, a gay parade from 1984. So it was very amazing when you came into the floor with the exhibition open to have these kind of brown bodies, because it also is the idea of, a body that is not white. And this is sort of different, how the exhibitions change when they travel is very interesting. The exhibition was around the dinner party by Judy Chicago, which is this kind of really kind of quintessential feminist work that is in the feminist wing of the Brooklyn Museum. These were social places. This was a section of repression and fear. This is in Brazil. In Brazil, because they didn't lend us a lot of the works that we needed. For example, Judy Baca, because that piece belongs to the Smithsonian and didn't want to lend it, we actually had to work with her. And we produced this photograph from her time as a Pachuca, as a photographer that completely challenges sense of beauty, challenges you in the way she looks and all the different faces. It's an incredibly theatrical and wonderful piece. Here you had Gloria Santa Cruz entering the space. We had different pieces also because we didn't have the same work, and we included Cocon and we included Alicia Barnier, other works. In this space, because we didn't have enough space to introduce the epidermic scape on the floor, we had it actually up on the wall, and it is conceived to be in either way. And it was very, very majestic also vertically. Also, because the Pinacoteca had some pieces by the same artist that we had in the show, we included these Amelia Toledo glue glues, which are about kind of liquids and is about fluids. And it was beautiful the way it was placed in front of Sophie Rivera's Tampexes, this kind of idea of the fluid, something more poetic, something kind of more bodily, the dialogue that it creates. Or this piece by Neide Sa, that it was the first time we would actually exhibit it as we really wanted it. These are pieces that she used to be attacked in the street by the police because there were kind of cuttings from the newspaper. People could put them together and write works like dictatorship, censorship, and so forth. So Lea Lublin, we couldn't have the pieces from MoMA, they wouldn't lend it to us, so we actually had to, we presented Fluvio Subtunal, which is a wonderful piece. It was more documentary, and this is the erotic section. And I think this is my last image, and I've finished. Thank you very much. Sorry, it was a... So the question is if, as a curator, as a result of the exhibition, I have a particular style. And so the issue is, I've been working as a curator more than 30 years now. And what happens is that you develop a sense of interest of what actually is important to you. And in my case, because I'm also an art historian, I'm interested in researching areas of art history that have been obscured. That's why my next project is about Chicano artists, Chicano experimentality, because in a moment, for example, that we live in now, we are completely raising the Latino population, and they have a lot to say, and the art has been somehow hidden. But I'm very interested in ideas of experimentation and singularity. And I have, for example, a very strong interest in abstraction. So this is one of my other things, which is completely on the opposite side of the spectrum in relation to, for example, to these more kind of conceptual political pieces, video art, performance art. But for me, it's all about the kind of investigations that artists have. And for me, the most important thing is to have a sense of respect, and if the artists are alive, to have conversations with the artists, so I'm not misrepresenting, misunderstanding, that I have a kind of a sense of responsibility more than a sense of power as a curator. You know, for quite a while there has been a thing about, you know, the curators being too powerful. And I don't really believe in that. I'm a woman, first of all, I'm a feminist, and I'm a person that tries to decolonize herself the whole time. And the more I look at the world and how troubled it is, the more I feel that I need to promote artworks of artists that have the courage to go against the current and that are critical, that create tension, and I don't really mind how they do it. It can be through painting, it can be through abstraction, it can be performance, it can be invisible, it can be a gesture. As long as where this departs is from this kind of attempt of an artist, of an individual to create sense. You know, for me, art is a universe that allows to say through images and visual culture things that we can't say very well in writing. You know, writing is not the same as an artwork, and I think art has a particular role in expressing, giving hope, make us think, make us reflect, sometimes even, you know, make us uncomfortable. So, you know, I believe in art as an endeavor, and I don't have a limit of how I think of it or how I think art. As long as it wants to say something or wants to do something, and it doesn't just want to function in the art market as something that can be commodified. You know, it can be commodified. Ideally, artists need to live off their work and need to be successful. That's what one of the things I want for example, all these women that have been marginalized, but not at the expense of actually renouncing to the possibility of being yourself.
I was interested in female artists playing with grotesque, and especially with regard to the body, female body in particular. And if you could talk a little bit more beyond just gender bias. And you said these women have been marginalized or not recognized in the canon of art history or a footnote to it. But the reaction you were talking about to them is incredibly powerful and strong because they are women, and as you were just talking about the commodification of art or whatever, shouldn't we be paying that much more attention to them as opposed to the Vito or Contis or Matthew Barney who were held up as sort of the geniuses of that kind of grotesque release?
So your question is that
the reaction is so much more powerful coming from women socially, right? These biases we have. Shouldn't you be paying that much more attention to sort of potency of their
yeah, I mean, I know that I need to repeat some sort of sense of your question, and possibly I'm not going to do justice. This idea of the fluid and this grotesque as informed, as expressed, manifesting in this women's work, is it something that we would need really to kind of to explore and kind of and really kind of place in a kind of a center stage? And I would completely agree. The thing is, you know, this has to do with many things. The thing is, for example, when you think of, let's say, menstrual blood, this is the fluid that is the most taboo in the whole universe is menstrual blood. I mean, people literally prefer to see the blood of a person that has just been assassinated to menstrual blood in representation of art, because there is plenty of blood in photography and a lot of things. So the issue is that we have, one of the reasons why I think is so powerful in some of the expression of these women and other women that we haven't seen here, you have Kubota of the Fluxus period making vaginal paintings. You have Caroline Schneemann, you know, doing the performance of the scroll where she pulls a scroll out of her vagina. You have, you know, Ana Mendieta talking about rape. I mean, these are real things. And the thing is, they come out of a woman's body. They talk about something that we don't want to come to terms with. One of the reasons why women have been also marginalized is because of menstruation. I mean, literally, that's what makes them women. That what gives us the possibility of bearing children, and every single individual in the universe has to do with that blood, because otherwise you wouldn't be there. But the thing is, it really is reflective of how society still deals. And also, if you think how the way women's body have been represented in our history is always this kind of super idealized, super beautiful, super white, and even when they represent black bodies or whatever, they always present them like the slave, and it's always desirable. And bodily fluids are not desirable from that point of view. They can't be objectified. This is about creating a visibility of something that can be also made subjective. But I personally feel if there is a space in art that is the most marginalized and is possibly one of the ones that is capable of most tension and transgression, is anything dealing with the bodily fluids, but not as a, if I think of Paul McCarthy, he deals with this kind of excrement and all this. There is something kind of more theatrical and it's a completely different nature. It's more of a game, as it were. This is really about something that is existential. But I think until women are not seen somehow as integral, as humans, beyond the idea of being objectified, I think it's going to be very difficult to view these pieces as valuable pieces of work. I mean, those still lives of Sophie Rivera, of the menstrual blood, they really are the most astonishing photographs. But people have trouble to look at them because we still think that, art has to be beautiful, or there is an accepted idea of quality and there is an accepted idea of what can be ugly or not, and that is going too far. And that's why I think this is one of the issues that I consider most radical about these women. There is no taboo, there is no limit, and art should not have any limit. But again, I think, literally for several years, I was thrown out of a museum, and the argument was, why will we spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to present a piece of a woman menstruating? This was literally the words of the director of the institution to throw me out of the institution. So I know, now, for me, has been an incredibly humbling experience. First of all, knowing some of the most incredible women in my life, but also to understand that it was so hard for them then, and it's still hard for women now. For me, even now in the political moment we live, a lot of it has to do also with the fact that women have so much more power. We need to continue now again, if we are in a moment in time where we want to again tell women, control their bodies and control whatever. So this is a moment. So those fluids, we're not going to see them anytime soon. They're not going to be in a museum. They're not going to be celebrated as part of an iconography that is fundamental to understand the inception of contemporary art. For me, these are kind of lost pieces in the discourse of how contemporary art is created, because 60 to 85 is the time where everywhere in the world, without exception, we invented, the invention of video art and photography and all this was done. Why women felt so free towards photography? Photography didn't have the same stigma as painting had. You could talk about, how would you do, you do a photograph of menstrual blood. Anyway, I went on a tangent, but the thing is, we have trouble to accept this as important because it's so closely related to celebrating women as they are, integral with everything they are. And we are not there in society.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Cecilia, and thank you to everyone.